welcome back to a sewing tutorial for the Daisy Blouse. This version of the Daisy Blouse, we're gonna have the pointy collar, long sleeve and buttons at the front. So I cut out the front pattern piece, back pattern piece on fold, 2 sleeves like the normal long sleeves, and then the pointy collar and the front lining. And then you also need 5 buttons to put at the front. If you want to, you could also have 4 buttons or 6 buttons. I always do this blouse with 5 buttons at the front. And then you also need some bias tape for the neckline. If you can't find bias tape matching the color of your fabric, you can also just quickly make your own bias tape. But let's start sewing and let's get into it. We can start with our collar. Here you have your 2 collar pieces. If your fabric has a good and a bad side, you would want to make sure that the 2 good sides are facing each other now. And then we're going to start sewing here and then all the way around, and we finish here. So this part here we leave open. And when you get to the corner here, make sure your needle is down, then you can lift your foot and continue. And now I'm just going to cut the corner here off. That's going to make it look nicer once we flip it, which we're going to do next. We're going to flip it the other way now, and then we're going to press it nice and flat. And the less fabric you have here in this corner, the less bunched up it's going to be. I always take a seam opener to really push the corner out. You just have to be really careful that you don't accidentally rip a hole in your fabric or in your seam. Then we can take our back piece, and you would want to make sure that the good side is facing you. And here with the front pieces, the bigger curve is our armhole, so this is our neckline. So now you want to make sure that the armhole of the back piece and the front piece are lining up. We sew the shoulder together now, so you really would need to make sure that here are both armholes and it's not accidentally this way. And again, if your fabric has a good and a bad side, you would want to make sure that the 2 good sides are facing each other. And now we just pin and sew along the shoulder. Now we're going to press the seam allowance open, and then we're going to overlock it. And now you can just iron the seam allowance towards the back so it lays flat on your shoulder like this. And now we lay our front and back in front of us. Good side is facing us, so our overlock part and our seam is facing the table. And then we just take the sleeve and we're gonna start pinning it. I always start pinning first like this curve, then I take the other end of the sleeve, start pinning it along here, and then I just pin it all in there. And then we're going to pin the other sleeve along here, along the other armhole. And now we want to sew the sleeves and the side of our blouse together. So here we have back, front, sleeve. Actually, I'm going to show you on this sleeve. I feel like it's a bit closer to the camera. So front, back, sleeve, good side is facing us. And then we fold the sleeve in half, fold the front on top of the back. And then the first thing you want to do is you want to line up your seam here. Pin that in place. And then you can pin along the sleeve and pin the side of the front and back together like this. Then you want to press your seam allowance open again. here we have the neckline of the back of our blouse folded in half because you want to find the middle. Then I just put a pin in here. And then I'm gonna do basically the same with our collar. I fold the collar in half to find the middle here. And then we take our blouse, and I'm just gonna start at the back here. So we have the good side facing us, good side, bad side, good side is facing us. And then I'm gonna line up our two pins, so the middle of the back and the middle of the collar here. Pin it in place, and then from here on I pin both directions, the collar onto the neckline of our blouse. Okay, so this is what it looks like so far. I thought maybe I'm just going to put it on quickly, just because sometimes when I pin everything and it's laying on the table, it just looks like a big ball of fabric, and maybe this way you can visualize it a little bit better. So what we're going to do now, we're going to sew our collar onto our blouse. You don't need to overlock it, just sew it with your normal sewing machine. Now you take your two front-facing pieces, and what you want to do is you want to iron one of the edges here from the long side, just like half a centimeter towards the inside. So if your fabric has a good and a bad side, you would want to have your bad side facing you. And then you iron it like this. And then you leave it like this, and then you do the same to your other front-facing piece. Then here we have a front piece. Good side is facing us, and then you take one of your front facing pieces, and you have the two good sides facing each other, and then you're just gonna sew along here, and then you do the same for the other front. Now we take our bias tape and we're gonna sew it along the neckline. I'm just gonna try and line up my fold line where I'm also gonna do the stitching perfectly with the seam where we have attached the collar. Then I cut the bias tape off. And now I'm going to trim a bit of the extra seam allowance away, just because my bias tape is a bit thinner than my seam allowance. So later, we still have a few things to do, but it's gonna look like this on the inside, which I think looks really nice. It's a really nice finish. One more thing we're gonna do now is we're gonna sew the seam allowance here from where we have sewn the front facing onto the front. We're gonna sew the seam allowance onto the front facing. Just gonna make it look a bit nicer. And you do the same to the other side. So we sew the seam allowance onto our front facing. And when you do that, you want to make sure you pull the two pieces a bit apart. So now I folded the front facing and the bias tape all towards the inside. So this is what the outside is gonna look like. And then this is the inside. So we're gonna start sewing at the bottom here. And I'm gonna sew relatively close to the edge. And then I'm gonna sew up one front. And then when we get to this point where the bias tape starts, I'm gonna make sure my needle is down. Then I move the fabric and then I'm gonna sew all the way along here, again really close to the edge of the bias tape, all the way along the neckline. And then here we are at the other front piece. And then same again, once I'm on my linen fabric again, I'm making sure the needle is down and then I sew down till I'm all the way over here. So now it's time to hem our blouse. It's up to you how long or short you want your hem to be. What I'm gonna do is, I think I'm gonna fold mine up around 1.5 centimeters and then 1.5 centimeters again. You could also do 2 centimeters or just 1 centimeter. Up to you. And then just fold it once, fold it twice, pin everything in place. You could also iron everything and then pin it, up to you. And then we're just gonna sew it, and then we can start on our buttons and buttonholes. Now it's time to sew our buttonholes. So what you want to do is you need to get the foot for your sewing machine to make buttonholes. Usually it always comes with your sewing machine. And then you put your button in there at the top, close it, and then it will automatically make a buttonhole exactly the size it needs to be for your button. So make sure it's in here. And then you just get rid of your normal foot. Put this one on here now, and then I take the thread from the top here, and then I put it through the hole here, like this. It's quite long now. And then with my machine, it's very important at the back here, there's this little thing here where there's a buttonhole printed on it. So you want to pull it down and push it to the back. Very important. So usually it's up here, you pull it down and then push it to the back. And then on my machine I just have to press on 0, and now it's on the setting for the buttonhole. Okay, so my buttons are 14 millimeters big, and the first thing I always make my top buttonhole first, and then from there I then measure once it's done where my other buttonholes go. So I just place my first button here to figure out where I want it to be. If I want it to be a bit lower or a bit higher, I wouldn't do it any higher just because there's a lot of fabric here, and that maybe like it's a bit hard for the sewing machine making the buttonhole nicely. So I place my buttonhole here, which is, and then I just put a pin right below it. So I'm going to start making my buttonhole from down here, and it's around 2 and 2.6 centimeters from the top here. For my, that's just for me, that's for this size buttons. I'm going to start making my buttonhole 2.6 centimeters from the top here. You want to make sure it's in the middle. And then I just start sewing. I always get so nervous. And here we have our first buttonhole. And then I push a pin through here. And then I take my seam opener. And now you need to open up your buttonhole. And the reason why I put the pin in here is so I don't accidentally rip too far and rip the buttonhole open. So this is like a stopper, so I can't go any further now. But then sometimes I just go in here again and rip the other direction. And now we have our first buttonhole. Okay, so now you need to decide how many buttons you want. I always do 5 buttons in total. And obviously you want all the buttonholes to be spread equally apart from each other, but you can decide if you want them 7 centimeters apart or 8 centimeters apart. When you have them 8 centimeters apart, the last one is going to be closer, like around 5 centimeters from the bottom here. But if you have them 7 centimeters apart, the last button is around 9 centimeters from the bottom here. So it basically just depends how low you want your last button to be. I prefer it if the last button is a bit higher, so around here. So I'm going to spread my buttons 7 centimeters apart from each other. So I'm just going to measure from the bottom of my first buttonhole 7 centimeters. Then I put a pin in here. You could also mark it with chalk, or there's also those heat erasable pens that you could use, but I've just always done it with a pin and it's always worked good for me. So I just measure 7 centimeters, 7 centimeters, 7 centimeters. And then I just make 4 more buttonholes here. And you always start sewing here and then they go up. Like this. Now that we have sewn all our buttonholes and then I've opened all my buttonholes up with my seam opener, it's now time for my least favorite part, and that is to sew on the buttons. It just takes a long time. I just don't enjoy hand sewing, but doesn't matter, we have to do it, so let's just get it over with. I'm gonna film it and show you how to do it for one of the buttons, but then I'm not gonna film all the other ones, otherwise it's just gonna get a little bit boring and repetitive, but obviously you have to repeat it for all your other buttons as well. So you need a needle. This one, I'm just gonna use one of them here. And then you need thread. I just used the one of my sewing machine. And the rule of thumb is to make it roughly as long as your arm. It needs to be quite long. And then you want to thread your needle like this. And you want the 2 ends now to line up. And then you want to make 2 knots. So first 1 knot and then the second one right on top of the first one. So 1, well, it's always so hard making them right on top of each other, so I have to make a third one, and then it's going to be one big one like this. I don't even know if you can see it. And yeah, I'm going to flip the camera and show you how to do the actual hand sewing. Okay, so here we have the 2 front pieces laying on top of each other. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start with the last button first. What I'm gonna do is I put my needle right through the middle of the buttonhole. Take the top layer away, and then I push my fabric, my pin through the fabric and straight back out again. And then I do that 2 more times, just because then you have like a good base, because you don't want your button to sit pressed onto the fabric, because this layer still then needs to go in between the button. 3 more times, 3 times in total. I should have just let me cut like the 2 little ends here a bit shorter, because otherwise there's too much thread flying around. Okay, so now we have a good base. Then I take my button and then I go through the other hole and I just do this 3 times in total. And now I'm gonna do it one more time, but I'm just gonna go through the fabric. And then I wrap the thread 3 times around, because this also helps us that the button is not sitting pressed onto the fabric, so there's like a little bit of space in between. And then I'm gonna push my needle through a little bit of fabric and thread, and then don't pull it tight yet. You want to make a knot and then do that again. Pull it tight, and now you can cut the rest of the thread off. And now hopefully your button is, I did want to say nice and tight, but it actually shouldn't be tight. There should be some space under here, but it should definitely not come undone again. So I've put my blouse on. Maybe it looks a bit funny right now because I'm wearing the Nikki top, so there's like the big knot right in the middle of my chest. But what you need to do now is you need to hem your sleeves. So maybe put your blouse on, figure out how short or long you want your sleeves to be, how wide you want your hem to be. I think I'm gonna fold the end of my sleeves up 2 centimeters and then 2 centimeters again, just so they're a little bit shorter, but yeah, completely up to you. So flip it so the inside of the sleeve is facing you, fold it up again, and then yeah, just hem it exactly the same way we did with the end of the blouse here. We've made it now to the end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I really hope you learned something. I really hope you were able to follow along. This is one of the many versions you can sew the Daisy blouse. There's heaps of other tutorials for it online on my channel, so have a look. And yeah, thank you so much if you've purchased a sewing pattern. It means so much to me, and tag me in your photos and your videos. I always love, like, it makes me so happy when I see how your versions of my sewing patterns turn out. It's, yeah, the best feeling. So thank you for your support. Thank you for watching, and I hope I see you soon again. Goodbye.